Howdy guys, welcome back to BRG Photography. This is Ben, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different and look at this plugin that can give your photos a really cool vintage analog look. Okay, so a while back I got a comment on one of my videos from a company called Dehancer asking if I was interested in perhaps collaborating. At first I was a little confused because even though I've known about this company for a few years now, I thought they only made film emulation plugins for video editing software like Final Cut Pro and DaVinci Resolve. And many of you guys may not know, but I do also shoot video, which is why I've known about them for a while. So I was surprised to learn that they also make plugins for photo editing software like Photoshop, Capture One, and of course Affinity Photo. So when they asked if I'd be interested in making a video talking about their plugin, I was pretty excited because I've always wanted to try out their software. And you know, I always want to be honest with you guys, so this is not a sponsored video, no money was involved, but they did give me a 1-month license to make this video, and they'll reward me with a lifetime license once the video is out. But most important is they do not impose any requirements on what I say about Dehancer. Therefore, you're going to get my 100% honest opinion, which, if you want to know right now, I think it's awesome and you can create some really cool looks, but it is a little pricey, especially for Affinity Photo users. So with all that being said, let me show you what kind of looks you can create with this plugin. Alright guys, welcome back. So what is Dehancer? Well, Dehancer is a film emulation plugin. And what does that mean? Well, the name kind of sums it up. It basically emulates the look of analog film, which can give your photos a more natural, vintage, kind of organic look. Now, this isn't just applying a grain filter and changing the colors a bit, but what Dehancer has done is they've actually scanned over 60 real-world film stocks to capture the unique look of each one of those individual film stocks. Okay, so what I want to do in this video is a quick overview of how the Dehancer plugin works and how you can create looks using it. But before we do that, it's probably best to show you a few examples of some of the looks I've created with Dehancer. So starting over here, we have this kind of fashion outdoor shoot I did a while back. And using Dehancer, I just kind of gave it a bit more of an organic film look. You can see I added some film grain, some film damage, there's some halation there. So this is the before and this is the after. I think it definitely takes the image and gives it a bit more organic, less digital look. Not to say this is bad, but this is just a look or a style. Here's an example where Dehancer can really accentuate and complement an already vintage looking image. I have this photo shoot. The model had this beautiful dress from like the 60s, and with her hair and her outfit, it's already very vintage looking. But by using Dehancer, I could really amplify that look by adding lots of heavy film grain, lots of film damage, some desaturation and some halation to really kind of create something that looks very modern as far as image quality and kind of destructing it to make it look really vintage. But saying that, not every image has to look, you know, vintage and retro. So this is an image of just some friends walking through Tokyo, and you can see here I used Dehancer just to kind of do a basic color grade to kind of soften up the whole look. So this is before and this is after. Nothing too crazy. It still looks like a modern image, just has a bit more of a softer analog look. Now, if you've seen my Instagram, you know that I do lots of in-studio fitness type photography. So I was kind of curious to see how this plugin would look in that type of environment. So this is a before and here is after using the Dehancer plugin. Still maintains its more modern look, but just gives it a little bit of a softer, I guess, you know, filmic look. And that's what this plugin is supposed to do, is emulate film. Here is a beauty portrait before and after. I went a bit more heavy-handed with this one to kind of really accentuate a kind of old style look. Maybe because of her hair and outfit, I thought it fit the image very well. But like I said, not everyone has to be kind of vintage. So this is the original of a photo shoot I did a few months ago. And using Dehancer, I was able to create a few different color grading looks. So here's one look, here's another look, here's another look, and here's one that more embraces the kind of film kind of aesthetic. But you can see, let me go ahead and turn these off. So this is the before, and you know, here's one look using Dehancer. Here's another kind of grade, very different looking. This one's a little bit similar to the first, and this one is a really different vibe. And so you don't always have to use this plugin to do something vintage and retro. Here's one last one that's kind of a more fun type look. Dehancer has a lot of these kind of film strip kind of overlays, so you can do kind of fun creative stuff like this. I don't see myself using this too much in any kind of my professional work, but I could definitely see myself using it as a fun, Instagram story or a fun Instagram post, something like that. So looking at all these examples, you might be asking yourself a question, which I asked myself, which was, can't I just make all this stuff in Affinity Photo with the tools that are available? And I guess you would say yes and maybe no to certain parts. At the end of the video, I actually have an example of a photo that I did where I tried to recreate the film emulation look as best I could. And I'll talk about some of the things that were involved in doing that and what Dehancer might do better. But right now what I want to do is kind of show you how the plugin works. So the first thing you're going to need to do is, once you've installed it, is get Affinity Photo ready to accept this plugin. And luckily, the documentation that comes with the plugin is really detailed, because this is actually the first time I've ever used a plugin in Affinity Photo. So to do a quick little overview, you need to go to your settings and you go to your Photoshop plugins tab, and you need to make sure that allow unknown plugins to be used is checked. And then once that's checked, you can go to the search folder and go ahead and find where that plugin is installed. On my Mac, it's installed in the library application support. You add it, then you're going to have to restart Affinity Photo once. And then once you open it back up, you should have filters, plugins, Dehancer, and Dehancer film. And when you click on that, that will open up the plugin. So first, this plugin only works on a pixel layer. So for example, if I have this curves layer adjustment selected and I go to filter, plugin, Dehancer, you can see it's grayed out and I can't use it. It needs to be on a pixel layer. But for example, if I were to make a brand new pixel layer and go to filter, plugin, Dehancer film, click on it, the window will come up, but you'll notice everything is blank. That's because the layer is blank. This needs to work on a pixel layer that has all of your pixel information on it. So the best thing to do is go to layer, merge visible, and that will create a brand new pixel layer with all of your pixel information on it. And then when you go to filter, plugins, Dehancer film, the window pops up and now you have all of your looks that you can start playing around with and creating. Let me go ahead and close this once. So one question you might be asking is, when would you use this in your workflow? I think the best place to use it is at the very, very end of your process where you're pretty much done. And now the last thing you need to do is do some color grading. So you can see in this image here, I've already done retouching and dodging and burning and cleaning up, contouring, all my normal steps. And now that I'm pretty much done with the image, this is when I would start applying my color grading. And this is where I would use the Dehancer plugin. So it's also important to note that in a sense, this plugin is kind of destructive. So we created this new pixel layer with all of our information on it. And just to show you really quick, if I go ahead and open it up, and I'm just going to apply this black and white look, and I'm going to hit OK. So this pixel now has this black and white look. Now, if I want to go back and try to change a few settings, I can't, because this has already been kind of rasterized and set. It's not a huge issue. If I wanted to reset and try something else, I would hide that or delete it. And I would have to go back and make a new merge visible layer, and then I could try again. The cool thing is that when I go back into Dehancer, it's going to remember the last settings that I used. So if I needed just to tweak a few little things, I could do that. There's also this little thing here where it says restore last used settings. You can also favorite and save some of your presets, so you can always go back to them. But anyways, getting ahead of myself, let's go ahead and actually make a image. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. So I've already kind of graded this image and it looks like this. I really went for this kind of old, kind of 80s, style, bubble era Japan look. And we're going to try to recreate this using Dehancer. All right, so with that new merged pixel layer selected, let's go ahead and rename this so we can keep track of everything. I'm going to call this Dehancer 3 because this will be my third attempt at grading it. My previous two, this is one of them and this is another. Both of them came out really cool, so we're going to try to recreate a look like this as best we can. So with that layer selected, we can go to Filter, Plugins, Dehancer, Dehancer Film Emulation, and it brings up the plugin. So what I want to do first, just to kind of start from scratch, I'm going to go ahead and reset everything. So we are just back to the default. Okay, so on the left side, you have your film profiles. I'm going to go ahead and click this to turn them on. And this is kind of the heart of the plugin. This is where you're going to see all the, I think 60 plus currently, different kind of film stocks that they have available. And like I mentioned earlier on, they scanned all of these individual film stocks to really capture the individual look and kind of certain characteristics of that film stock. So if you're a film guy or an analog film shooter, you're more than likely going to recognize a lot of these film stocks. But here's where you're going to pick kind of your base look. So what we're going to do is kind of find a look that we think matches this image. I kind of like this one here. This looks pretty cool. I favorited this Astrum color because I think it looks nice. This Cinestill 50D and 800 looks pretty neat too. So let's actually try this one here, the Cinestill 50D. Okay, so once you've picked your film stock, the next thing they recommend doing is to play around with this push and pull slider. And if you've watched my other videos before, maybe I've mentioned this, I think the best way to learn what something does is just to go from one extreme to the other, because you can really get a visual idea of what's happening. So if we start kind of pushing and pulling this slider, you can kind of see it is having a subtle effect on the contrast and the colors. And what this slider represents, without getting into too much detail, is with analog film, you can do something called push or pull your exposure. And this is where you would, for example, purposely underexpose when shooting, but then overdevelop in the development process to bring that exposure back to normal exposure. And that's going to give a little bit of a different look as far as contrast and colors compared to if you had just exposed normally. And of course, you can do the opposite, purposely overexpose, underdevelop. And that's what this slider is emulating. So you can kind of play around with it. You kind of find something that you like. And again, this is just our base, because once we start really moving into all these sliders and stuff here, this is kind of where like the magic happens in a sense. So once you kind of find somewhere you like, let's say something about like that, then we can start really playing around and having fun. It's also important to note that you're not stuck with your base film stock. At any time, you can always go back and change your film stock, and it will still retain all the settings that you had previously, adjusted. Now, if you want to do something really quick, there are a bunch of presets already built in, made by the Dehancer team. You can of course save your own presets, but you can go through and you can start clicking around and see some of the presets they've created. There are some really fun looks. A lot of them are a bit too heavy-handed for my taste, but it does kind of give you a quick idea of what's possible. And if you wanted, you could start with a look and then come over here and customize it yourself. But what I want to do is start from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and reset everything. And what did we choose? We chose the the Cinestill 50D. I think that has a kind of a cool look. Kind of push and pull it around here. Okay, so now we've got our base look dialed in. Now we can look at all these really cool tabs, and this is kind of where the experimentation starts. Now, I don't want to go over each and every one of them because the video would be like an hour and a half long, but I do want to quickly just kind of show you what each one does so you can see if this is something that you might be interested in. All right, so the first one is source. This is the one that I probably won't be using too much, because what this does is this is where you can make corrections to your original image before any of the plugin's effects take effect. So maybe if you brought something in straight from camera and you needed to do some exposure compensation or some white balance compensation, you could do that here. But for me, for the most part, when I'm bringing my image into this plugin, it's already set and ready to go. I've already done any kind of color correction or exposure corrections beforehand, so I wouldn't need to really mess with this. But I guess you still could, mess around with color temperature to make it warmer or cooler. But for me, I think I'm okay with this right now. And so the first step they recommend after choosing your film profile and adjusting your push and pull is to check out the expand tab. And this is where you're going to set your black and white point. And I like to look at this by turning on the clipping here. And that way I can see like where my blacks have clipped and where the whites have clipped. I want to make sure I don't have any kind of clipping in my image. So I'm going to bring the white point to about here and the black point maybe just to, I don't mind some of the darkest parts clipping a little bit, something like that. And there I have my image, not too much of a difference. I kind of made a bit more contrast. And so there I've kind of set my white and black points. Now, as you start messing around with other tools, this might change. So you might have to come back to this expand tool a few times to kind of readjust your black and white point. And that's kind of like with any kind of color grading. It's not just 1, 2, 3, and you're done. It's a lot of 1, 2, back to 1, go to 3, back to 2, back to 1. So there's a lot of back and forth, but that's kind of the fun. All right, so once you've done expand, they recommend next looking at the color head. And this is where you're going to kind of start dialing in your base color. Now, looking at these sliders, I don't think I have to explain what these do. They're all pretty self-explanatory, right? Adds yellow, adds blue, right? Here we have shadow, midtone, and highlights, cool tones in the shadows or warm tone in the shadows. This is where you can really start dial in a kind of particular look. So what I want to do here is kind of give it a greenish yellow look, which I think kind of complements like the kind of fluorescent lights you might see in a phone booth. Maybe warm up the tones and the midtones. Maybe cool down the highlights a little bit. Here we have this impact slider. A lot of these other tools will have this. This is basically like the opacity. Okay, so just playing around with this, I kind of like this look here. I like that we can also check each one of these tabs on or off to see what we've done. So this is a before and this is our after. And this is kind of a good starting point. Again, for this image, I want to be a bit heavy with the grade and really give it a vintage retro look. Okay, so once you've done expand and color head, this is where we can really start adding what they call like the seasoning, right? The spice, like the fun stuff. This is where things can really get really interesting. So really quick, I was going to talk about these. Film developer, this kind of simulates configuring the developer solution in the development process. One thing to note is that these two sliders, gamma correction and color separation, only operate once you've made an adjustment to the contrast boost. This is going to kind of, have an effect on contrast. And once you have made that adjustment, then these sliders will activate gamma correction, basically specifying how much of the midtones go into the shadows or the highlights. Color separation is kind of saturation levels. Usually the highest saturated areas will be desaturated first. And then color boost is just overall kind of global saturation. You go ahead and reset that. So we can kind of play around with something here, maybe lower the contrast a bit, find something that we kind of like. I think it actually looks pretty good as is. Nothing too drastic there. Next is film compression. So with film, like clipped highlights look a bit different than they do with digital. And so this lets you kind of control the highlight distribution. So let me go ahead and zoom in here. So up here you have these little icons, and here I can zoom to fit, or I can zoom and do 100%. I guess the one little nitpick is I wish I had more zoom options, because basically right now I can go to zoom to 100% or zoom to fit, and that's all. It would be nice if I could zoom in to say 200% or just 75%, or control my zoom like I normally do within Affinity Photo. Not a huge deal, but something to be aware of. All right, so looking at film compression, what this does, it kind of controls the highlight. So if we look at the highlight on her nose, her cheek, and her jacket, if I bring the impact hot, sliding back and forth, like I said, just mess around, you can kind of see this kind of really softens up the highlights. You can adjust the tonal range to see how much of that tonal range is being affected. You can set the white point. And this is a really great way to kind of soften up some of those highlights so that the clipping or the highlight clipping can look a little bit more natural. It also might help to turn on your clipping to make sure you're still not clipping when you start adjusting some of these settings. But I think softening up the highlights a little bit might look kind of cool in this image. Color density is how much of that highlight retains color or doesn't have color. I want to make sure color is still in there, but maybe something like that. So this is the before, this is the after. You can say I just brought down the highlights a little bit. Again, this is all subjective. I'm just kind of playing around to kind of show you what's possible here without trying to get too detailed or spend too much time. All right, film compression, done. Print. So print, this is here to kind of simulate printing on a physical medium, like what kind of, film print that you would do on. So for example, if you were printing on Kodak 2383, it would look something like this. And of course, we have sliders here to make adjustments to kind of get a particular look. And this actually looks pretty cool. I think it fits the image quite well. And again, like with that, rather than explaining each and every single one of these sliders You know, a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. Saturation makes a lot of sense, right? Color density, I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly what that does, but you know, I can kind of see it's definitely having an effect on some of the highlights here. And so just by playing around, I think it's the best way to kind of figure out something you like. Maybe, yeah, let's do that one. That one looks kind of interesting. The only thing I wish there was a impact slider or an opacity slider for this one. Sometimes these print looks are a bit too strong. So that's off and that's on makes quite a difference. I do wish I could just kind of reduce that particular effect by say 50%. But something that maybe they'll add at one point later on in the future. Do I like this? Maybe not. Actually, you know what? Let's keep it. We're going for a more heavy look, a more high stylized look. So we're going to go ahead and keep that. Maybe I will adjust the exposure a bit. And like I said, once I've done this, maybe now I want to go back to my expand, and I might have to make some adjustments to the highlights and white points, you know, to see like what is happening here. Or maybe come back to my film developer and maybe adjust some of the contrast and stuff, because, you know, every tool is going to have an effect on the whole image. So you may need to go back and do some earlier corrections. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with this. Okay, print, we're done. Color head we did. All right, here's kind of the fun stuff, right? Film grain. Film grain makes a lot of sense. Let me go ahead and zoom in so we can actually see what we're doing here. There are a lot of presets, so you can have 35mm ISO 250, 8mm ISO 500 will probably have a really heavy grain. Something like 65mm ISO 50 has really fine grain. You probably can't even see it on YouTube. I can barely even see it, but it's more fun to go in. Let's go ahead and start with something like 16mm 250, and then go over here and hit custom. And now you're presented with all these sliders where you can adjust the size of the grain, how much grain is there, the resolution. If we lower the resolution, you can see it makes the whole image really soft. This is kind of a cool look. And then shadows, midtones, highlights. This lets you control how much grain is in the shadows. So here, there's going to be no grain in the shadows. You can see there's none in the black. But if I bring it all the way up, you can see we have a lot more grain present in the shadows. And so here you can really fine tune your grain. This is of course way too much, I think. I'm gonna go ahead and just drop it down a bit. And yeah, I don't mind losing some resolution. It kind of softens up the whole image. That's the before and that's the after. Maybe I will make the grain a bit bigger just so it's easier to see on YouTube. And then you have different film types and different modes that you can play around with. Negative is going to have a bit more of a stronger grain. I think this will be easier to see on YouTube if I kind of take it to the extreme a bit. All right, cool. Next we have halation. Now halation is one of those things where if you don't know what it's called, you're not going to know what this means, but when you see it, you're like, okay, yeah, I know what that looks like old film. So for example, if I were to take something like this and we zoom in a bit, I'm going to turn it off and on. So this is off and this is on, and you can see, you recognize this is okay. It's kind of like the film kind of bleeding a little bit in the high contrast areas. There is an explanation on why this happens, but I don't want to get into it because this video is probably already too long anyways. But just like before, there's a lot of presets, or you can go to custom and you can customize all of these things to really nail it exactly where you want. It also has this really cool mask mode, so you can actually see where this effect is taking place. And by using the source limiter, you can limit it to just the highlights or a lot more of the whole image. And then you have things like how much of that background gain, how smooth the kind of effect is, how much local diffusion versus global diffusion. Is it doing the whole image globally or just in the really highlighted parts? A lot of really fun tools to play around with. I want to bring it to where it's not in her eyes so much, but just in the highlight areas. And maybe bring up that local diffusion. Again, trying to do something a bit heavy-handed for this look. So that's off and that's on. That looks pretty cool to me. Not too much, but you know, I think it fits the image. All right, closing that, we have bloom. Bloom, again, you click on it, you know what it does. It just adds like a nice bloom effect. There are some presets, or you can come into custom and customize it to basically exactly how you want it. This also has a cool mask mode, so you can see exactly where that bloom effect is taking place. But here you can just kind of adjust, how diffused do you want it? Again, here's the impact slider, basically opacity, 0, 100%. You find somewhere that you like. Let's go ahead and click it on and off, before, after. All right, it's a bit heavy-handed, but we'll lower the impact a little bit. That looks cool. Okay, down here we have film damage. If we click on that, you're going to instantly know what that does. That just creates all kinds of film damage. And the most fun is going into custom. And here you have, dust, hairs, or scratches, plus total amount global opacity. So for example, let's say that you like the hairs, but you don't want to have scratches. You can click scratches off. So I should say that this plugin is technically still in beta, and even though it's worked completely flawlessly since I've been using it and it hasn't crashed or caused any problems and it's been very, very, very smooth, there are still a few little quirks and maybe small bugs. Like for example, I switched off the scratches, but as you can see, there are still scratches there. But once I move a slider, then the scratches go away. That goes the same for the hairs. If I click off the hairs have been disabled, but the hairs are still present. But once I move a slider around, then the hairs will disappear and I can bring them back. And then again, if I click, they don't go away. Not a huge deal, but maybe something they'll fix later on. So basically here you can really kind of customize the size of the hairs, the color, how big they are. Are they going to be more white? Are they going to be black hairs? The size of the dust grain. And it has this really cool refresh down here. So you click on refresh and it basically refreshes all of the dust. So it's not just like a single overlay of some hairs. They must have scanned a bunch of different examples and kind of randomized them, because I've done this a few times and haven't really seen too many repeats. So it is pretty neat to, if you want to add more of that kind of damage to your film here. Let's kind of find something that looks cool. Okay, that's maybe a bit heavy, but I like it. We're going to go ahead and do that one. Close that. The next one is overscan. This is kind of one, actually before I do that, let's go ahead and do vignette, because this is pretty self-explanatory, right? That's a vignette, right? Usually when I'm doing vignettes, I like to lower the feather and lower the exposure so I can see exactly where my vignette is. You can change the shape. Let's go ahead and change it to something like that. Then I can make it a bit bigger. Then I can start feathering it, and then maybe adjusting the exposure so it's not too harsh. All right, and the last one is this overscan mode. This is that one I was showing you earlier where it's kind of a fun little film strip effect. We can of course adjust the offset so that I can get it just where I want it. That looks kind of fun. And there are a lot of presets that you can use, widescreen, Panavision, 16mm. Let's actually do standard 16mm, maybe even Super 8. You can change the perf mode to negative or positive. Again, this would be something that I would just kind of throw on a story or something just for fun. It would be cool if there was a way to like import 2 other images. So instead of it being the same image tripled, you could have 2 different images to kind of create that kind of cool effect. I could probably do something like that later, but it would be a cool little option. So basically, once you already have, let's turn that off. Once you have your look dialed in, if you wanted to, you could favorite this and save it as a preset. But once you're done, you hit OK. And now you have that look there. Here's our before and here is our after. And like I said, if you wanted to go back and make changes, like say, for example, you know what, I think the bloom is too much. There's too much bloom. I want to fix that. You can and can't. So you can't go back into this and start adjusting it. What you can do though is go ahead and turn that off. Let's go ahead and make a new merge visible layer. And then when I go back into the plugin, it's going to keep all the exact settings I had before. So I could come back over here and just say turn off bloom and turn off halation, and then I could redo it. And so now I have the exact same one as before. So here it is, but now we have it without the bloom and halation. So this is pretty cool. You can see the dust particles did change a little bit, not a huge deal. So that's one thing to definitely be aware of. So to answer the question I asked at the beginning, where I asked myself, can't I just create these looks in Affinity Photo? And I answered kind of yes and no. So I want to show you an example of my attempt at trying to create a film look. So here's that earlier image that I showed you before. And I'm going to go ahead and show you a kind of film look that I created. So here's before and here is after. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit. And so you can see before and after. And if we compare it to the initial one, so this is the one I used Dehancer to create. And I wasn't trying to create this look exactly. I was just trying to create a film look in general. So here's before and here is with Dehancer. And here is my before and my quote unquote film look. And if you look at my layers, let me go ahead and turn these off. If you look at my layers, you can kind of see I started with a little base color, then a hue shift, then the color grading using the curves to do some basic color grading. Then I added grain. The grain I made using a Perlin noise layer with some other little things that kind of make it a little bit more organic than the typical add noise filter they have in Affinity Photo. Then I have a diffused glow just to kind of add a little bit of a glow. And then some bloom. I tried to add some bloom. And then I added some dust. You can see I just kind of drew in some dust and hair particles there. And then my attempt at doing halation. And so this probably took me, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes to an hour of a bit of playing around to try to figure out how to go from here to a more film look where, Dehancer, I think I made this one in about 5 minutes. So I would say, yes, you can create something similar, although I will say, for example, the algorithms they have for their bloom and especially the halation and film grain are probably a bit more advanced than what I could do in Affinity Photo. I probably could get really, really close. I actually think I did a pretty good job of emulating the halation effect in Affinity Photo. I can't remember exactly what I did. I think I selected the highlights, made that separate layer, filled it in with a color, added some outer glow and Gaussian blur, affecting only the highlights. I don't remember exactly. I know there is some stuff happening here. But, it's pretty close. But, it takes more time than if you were to do it in Dehancer, where I just click collation and I'm done. So, yes and no. I think if you really wanted to, you could probably spend some time to create a kind of film look. But I do like that, Dehancer has real world film looks to do that. So, yeah, that was a bit long, but that is Dehancer. Another cool thing is they actually also have a iPhone app, so you could edit all this stuff on your phone if you like. The app operates exactly like the plugin. You have all the exact same presets. You can come down here to edit, and you have all the same film stocks to choose from. You have all the same options. I do like that you can now pinch to zoom, makes things a bit easier to edit. You can also just tap and hold the photo to get a before, release to see an after, but all the same looks, all the same effects are down here. You can come over here and go to your color head and mess around with the color properties. All the same sliders are present. So if you're used to using the plugin, the app is going to feel basically like the same thing, just a little bit more cramped because it's on a phone. I think the app also does do video. So when you do video, there are a few more options that are related to kind of motion video as opposed to pictures. But this is pretty fun to play around with because I guess you could export your photos from Affinity Photo into your phone and edit them on your phone before uploading them to Instagram or wherever else. But it's also kind of fun to play around with if you are just taking snaps or photos from your phone and editing them just to kind of give them a little bit of, I don't know, kind of style. All right, so what do I think about Dehancer? Well, personally, I think it's awesome. Like I said, I've known about them for a few years, but only for video. So I was excited that I can now do all this cool stuff in Affinity Photo. Sometimes it honestly feels like cheating because you can create some really cool looks in just a few seconds, especially for someone like me who likes color grading and likes doing things by myself. But I can definitely see myself using it in my workflow, especially for my more creative personal work. I think the only real negative, especially for Affinity Photo users, is going to be the price. Currently, for a lifetime license, it costs $200 USD, which I think is going to be pretty hard for Affinity Photo users to pay, since Affinity Photo itself only costs like $70 US. And if you bought it when it was on sale at 50% off, you probably paid like $35 for it. Now, this license does include the plugin for Photoshop, Lightroom Classic, Capture One, and of course Affinity Photo, so there is some value there. But if you're mainly an Affinity Photo user, I think it's going to be hard to justify the price of $200 for a niche plugin, even though what it does in that niche is really awesome. Now, they do have a subscription plan, of course, like most companies do, but I think most Affinity Photo users are kind of anti-subscription, so would probably only consider a lifetime license. But if this is something that fits your style or editing aesthetic, they do have a free trial so you can play around with it. And if you do decide to purchase it one day, they did give me a discount code. So if you use the code BRGPhoto, you'll get 10% off, and I'll make a little commission on the sale, which always kind of helps out the channel. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is that 10% discount code is valid for all Dehancer products except the iOS app subscription. So that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, even though it was a little departure from what I usually do. But in the next video, we're going to get back into some retouching techniques and talk about something that I'm kind of surprised I haven't already talked about. So until then, guys, peace.